Hello everyone. Welcome to our session about making package uploading and deployment easier with Jamf Uploader. My name is Graham Pugh and I'm a Mac client engineer from the UK working at ETH, a technical university in Zurich, Switzerland.
And my name is Anthony Reimer and I run the computer labs for art, music, drama, and dance at the University of Calgary in Canada. Here's a common scenario for Jamf Pro administrators. You hear about an update of an app you deploy, either directly or via self-service. It might even be urgent because of a security update or an important bug patch. What do you do now? Here's a typical manual workflow. You go to the vendor's website or download portal, find the link to the downloader and download it. If the downloader installer is not a package, you need to convert it to a package to use in Jamf Pro. Then upload the package to your Jamf Pro server, whether that's local or in the cloud. Add a category and other information to the uploaded package. Then find the policy that deploys the app, which might be a patch management policy, and switch out the package. Then flush the policy if it's a run once policy, or change the target version if it is a patch management or dynamically scoped policy. If this is what you are doing now, you are viewing the right session. AutoPackage can help us automate some or all of these steps. AutoPackage can take care of the first three steps using common package recipes. In fact, it can even take care of the unstated step 0, determining that an update is available in the first place. We won't go over the basics of using AutoPackage here, but there are some great conference session videos linked in the resources section of the AutoPackage wiki that can help. I'd like to highlight Greg Nagel's session from Mac Sysadmin 2019 and my co-presenter's session from JNUC 2019 as great places to start. For most people, just adopting AutoPackage is a huge gain. This session will focus on using the group of AutoPackage processors in the Jamf Uploader project, which leverages the Jamf Pro Classic API to automate some or all of the remaining steps. In fact, Jamf Uploader can do additional tasks such as uploading scripts, extension attributes, and configuration profiles. But to begin with, we are just going to focus on automating the workflow you see on the screen. This session will look at Jamf Uploader from two different perspectives. I have a lot of AutoPackage experience, but I'm fairly new to using Jamf Pro for deployment workflows, so I have no history with tools like Monkey or JSS Importer. I also deploy exclusively to shared use Mac labs, so I don't use self-service.
And I've been a heavy user of AutoPackage for a few years now, initially using Monkey, but for the past 6 years with Jamf Pro. My deployment environment has multiple Jamf Pro instances, mainly to single-user computers, with scoping controlled by departmental admins in their own Jamf Pro instance, many of whom choose to use self-service, though others use auto-deploy, like in Anthony's labs. There have been other attempts at using AutoPackage to automate things in Jamf Pro using the Classic API. JSS Importer is the most notable. I've used JSS Importer for package deployment since we migrated to Jamf Pro at ETH, and I became its maintainer when its developer Shay Craig moved jobs and stopped using Jamf Pro. So why have I created a new tool to do the same job? Well, JSS Importer requires additional Python packages to function. So JSS Importer must be installed separately to AutoPackage itself. It's optimized towards a standard recipe design. You can change certain aspects of the recipes to fit your needs, but this gets complex or sometimes not possible if you veer too far away from the envisaged standard. Despite making some changes to JSS Importer, the complex underlying frameworks and their limits to its flexibility have remained a challenge. I wanted to use the power of AutoPackage not just for creating the package testing policies, but also to deploy all our policies and scripts. I needed something more flexible, and as maintainer, easier to understand. AutoPackage's core processors tend to do one specific task. They are simple to configure and can be used as many times as required. Taking inspiration from these, I decided to make a set of small, simple processors to do each of the specific tasks that JSS Importer tries to do in a single processor. Collectively, I call these processors Jamf Uploader, but they are actually 6 different processors based on what they are intended to upload. You only need to add the processors to your recipe that are required for the items you want to upload. If you just have a package to upload, then just add the Jamf Package Uploader processor to your recipe. If you want to assign a category to your package, then add the Jamf Category Uploader processor. If you want to automate the creation of a policy and smart group with which to push the package to clients or offer it in self-service, then use the Jamf Policy Uploader and Jamf Computer Group Uploader processors, and so on. You only use the processors you need, and you can use them multiple times in a single recipe. Unlike JSS Importer, there's nothing to install. Just add my AutoPackage repo to your repo list as you would to use one of my recipes. I hope we've piqued your interest in Jamf Uploader. Anthony's now going to show you how to get started.
Let's begin by looking at these 2 processors from the project, which can give you an immediate benefit. As their names imply, they can be used to automate uploading packages and adding categories to Jamf Pro. As with most AutoPackage processors, these processors have some necessary input variables. Here are the ones for Jamf Package Uploader processor. Normally, the package path and version would be supplied by the parent recipe, so you wouldn't usually need to add them manually. The processor needs to know how to connect to the Jamf Pro server. Because the password for this account will be stored in plain text on your system, I recommend setting up a separate AutoPackage user account that has just the privileges you need. Details on which privileges are needed are available in the Jamf Uploader wiki. If you are using an on-prem Jamf Pro server, you will also need to specify the location of the share. I recommend using the same AutoPackage-specific account. The Jamf Category Uploader processor requires similar information for the Jamf Pro server. So, how do you specify the Jamf Pro server info? Well, one way is to add the necessary input variables to each recipe. Since you are likely to have many packages you wish to upload, this could become quite tedious. Another method is to make these variables available whenever AutoPackage runs by adding them to AutoPackage's preferences. The defaults write command here is your friend. All 6 of these commands are one-liners. As mentioned earlier, if your Jamf Pro server is in the cloud, you only need to set the first 3 variables. Every example we provide from here on out will assume that these values have already been set. If you're used to running AutoPackage from the command line, you can actually use the Jamf Package Uploader processor as a post processor to any package recipe, and it will upload any new package to the Jamf Pro server. Just use the --post flag. You'll see here that we are using the syntax for shared processors, since Jamf Uploader is not part of the core AutoPackage repo. Again, this command is all on one line. Jamf Package Uploader also lets you attach a category to the package, which you can specify using the -k or the ~key flag. The only caveat is that the category must already exist if you run it this way. Note that the key flag is a general AutoPackage option for the run verb, which can be handy if you need to supply an input variable for a recipe run on a one-off basis. While this method works perfectly well, I suspect most of you will want to use an AutoPackage recipe to do this work. Let's look at how this would be done. Graham has shared a couple of recipes that you can use as a model in his recipes repo in the AutoPackage project. I used those as a template to create the next recipe I'm going to show you, one that uploads the Firefox Sign Package installer to a Jamf Pro server. Let's take a look at the top half of the recipe. The description describes what we're going to do, but also points out that it expects the Jamf Pro server variables to be set and notes that you need the Graham Pugh recipes repo. The identifier should have your GitHub username or other unique identifier and should specify that this is a package upload recipe. The current convention is to add -package-upload to the recipe name and identifier. The only input key we need is for the category we want to assign to the package in the Jamf Pro server. At the bottom of the screen, you will see the parent recipe from the core recipes repo. This is followed by two simple processor steps. The first creates that category in Jamf Pro for the package we are about to upload, and the second uploads the package. Note that we use the same identifier/processor name syntax as we did with the post processor option, so that AutoPackage can find the Jamf uploader processors. That is the entire child recipe. You can now override it in preparation for running it in production. As of version 2.3 of AutoPackage, you can also write your recipes in YAML, short for Yet Another Markup Language. Just add .yaml to the file name and AutoPackage will know how to handle it. Here's what the recipe we just wrote looks like in YAML. Because it's a lot easier to read and we can fit more info onto one screen, this is what we will use for the rest of our recipe writing examples. So, just by doing that little bit of work, we already have profit. Doing this was a great way for me to get started with the Jamf Uploader project. Even with manual work remaining in my workflows were already much more efficient. As Graham mentioned earlier, the Jamf Category Uploader Processor will create any category that does not already exist on the Jamf Pro server. But what if you want to limit yourself to categories that already exist? You can choose to completely omit the Jamf Category Uploader Processor step. The Jamf Package Uploader Processor will assign the category without issue if it exists, but will cause a failure if it doesn't. This is actually what I want for my personal workflows, so my -package-upload recipes only need one processor step. Simple. But what if you want to add or update a policy for that shiny new package you now have in Jamf Pro? The Jamf Uploader project can help here too. The Jamf Policy Uploader Processor can take care of steps 6 and 7, as you see on the screen, or could even be used to create a new policy which would automatically be triggered. Most of the heavy lifting is done using an XML template. There are a couple of template examples in Graham's repo that you can learn from, but we're going to build one from scratch so that you can include the options you want. Here are the most common attributes in the policies I write since I am deploying to shared lab computers. I'm going to take an existing policy with these attributes and use this as the basis of my template. I do this by downloading the policy as an XML file using the Jamf Pro Classic API. Just take the address of your Jamf Pro server and add /API to get there. When you enter that in your browser, this is what you get. So just click on Classic API, and you will see in your browser all sorts of options for the API. We want policies. There we have it. So just click on that, and let's see what policies we have in the repo right now. I have a demo repo that I'm using, so I'm just going to click on Try It Out. There are no parameters. I click on Execute, and it shows the nice commands you'd actually use, and there's the result. I have two policies, and what do you know? There's a policy called Policy Template. So I'm going to scroll down further, and I'm going to get all the information about that policy now that I know its name. So I click on Get, again, Try It Out. I type in Policy Template. I guess I could have copy and pasted it as well. And I click on Execute. This time, there's a lot more stuff, but there it is. Those are all the details of that policy. So I just click on the download button and it gets sent to my system. As you may have noticed when I scrolled through there, the XML policy had a lot of stuff that was just a bunch of self-closing tags or defaults that don't apply. We can get rid of those bits. We also need to get rid of any tags that give an ID number, since that is something that Jamf Pro will take care of for us when we use the API to create the policy. That leaves us with something like this. This is all the critical information needed to create this policy. But if the goal is to create a reusable template, our policy will not really be called Policy Template, nor will it always use the same category, nor will the package payload have the same name. This is where we put the power of AutoPackage to work with variable substitution. Package_name is supplied automatically through the parent package recipe, while the others are supplied as input variables. You'll probably have to do some trial and error to get your template perfect, and you may need more than one template. Graham is going to go into much greater depth about that in a few minutes. So now that we have a policy template, let's take the recipe we wrote earlier for Firefox and add the Jamf Policy Uploader processor step. Here's what the input and process sections of the recipe look like. We add input variables related to the policy we are creating, including the name of the policy template. Just as with the previous recipe, we upload category and package information with the first two processors. Next is stop processing if. That is a core auto package processor which checks if a particular event happened or not in the previous processor and stops the recipe from proceeding if the predicate matches. The Jamf package uploader processor outputs a true or false value depending on whether a package was uploaded, so we check against that value. This allows us to stop the recipe if there's no new package, which speeds up our workflow and prevents us from overwriting a policy erroneously. We finish with Jamf Policy Uploader, which builds the policy in Jamf Pro from our template and input variables. In my situation, this is all I need to automate most of what I need to do to deploy apps in Jamf Pro. Graham has other, more complex use cases that can also benefit from the Jamf Uploader project processors, so let me hand the rest of the presentation over to him.
Thanks, Anthony. As Anthony just demonstrated, your recipe only needs the processors for each specific object you want to upload into Jamf. In this section, I'll show you recipes which create dynamically scoped self-service policies, allowing you to fully automate your package deployment workflow. Processors need to be added to recipes in the order that items need to be created. Categories and extension attributes can be created first because these do not depend on anything else. Packages and scripts may have an assigned category, so they should come after the category. Computer groups may include extension attributes and other computer groups, so should come after the EAs, and if you're creating multiple groups, you have to consider the order based on any group dependencies in the criteria. And policies often depend on all of the above, so will generally go last. Any Jamf recipe which includes a policy and a specific scope will need at least 3 files. That is, the recipe itself, an XML template file to populate the policy, as we saw earlier, and at least one smart group template file. Here, we're going to construct a recipe that creates a self-service policy scoped to any computer in a static group named testing, which does not already have the version we are uploading installed. This dynamic method of scoping means that you don't need to flush policies, because as a new version of Firefox is released, the computer will fall back into the scope because it still has the older version. Let's look at the recipe and templates required. Here's the recipe. The input list has grown considerably because we need to supply values for the smart group name and criteria, self-service details such as description and the icon. This looks complex, but you'll find that there are few differences between recipes of standard apps. So creating a new recipe is normally easily done by duplicating an existing one and just changing the name and category. Down in the process list, the computer group uploader processor has been inserted before the policy. Here is our new policy template. The template is longer than Anthony's example because it includes a scope and the self-service details, and because in this template we've provided the ability to define a policy run command as well. And here is the XML smart group template file, which defines that any computer is in scope if it either does not have Firefox installed at all or does not have the current version. JSS inventory name is a special key name in Jamf Policy Uploader that I borrowed from JSS Importer. By default, it adds .app to the value of the name variable, for example, Firefox.app. But you can specify an alternative in the recipes input list if necessary. I also set the criterion that is normally called application version as a variable, so that if we need to use an extension attribute to determine the version, we can still use this same template, but you could use a different template instead. And here is, Some recipes need a script to be added to the policy because some action is required before or after the installation of the app. For this, we need to change the recipe and the policy template. Let's take a look at such an example. For my Microsoft Office 365 recipe, I need a pre-install script. So in this recipe, we set the script name and priority, and we have 3 script parameters. So we provide the labels and values for these. In the process list, we have the Jamf script uploader processor in the recipe to set the default script category, priority, and the parameter labels. In our policy template, we add input variables for script name, priority, and the values of parameters 4, 5, and 6. Note that any variable added to a template or process do need to be set in the input list, even if set as explicitly blank. If there's a variable in one of the templates but it's not defined anywhere, the recipe will fail. Another example, we might need an extension attribute to define the scope. For example, if the version string being determined by AutoPackage is different to the one being collected by Jamf's inventory. In this recipe for Microsoft Edge, we've added keys for an extension attribute script called extension attribute-cfbundle short version string.sh. There is a key for the name we want the EA to have in Jamf Pro and a key for the path to the script itself. The second key is only necessary if we want to automate the upload of the EA script rather than manually add it in the Jamf console beforehand. In this recipe, we do want to upload the script, so we've added the Jamf extension attribute uploader process to this recipe to do so. Here's that script itself, by the way. We can add this script anywhere within our recipe repo. As you can see, you can add variable substitution to scripts just as you do in templates and recipes. These variables are populated during the recipe run. So you can create template scripts and extension attribute scripts that can be used again and again for different policies and smart group criteria. I want to mention 4 advanced tips for using Jamf uploader processes that can make your testing and automation even better. First, if I need to replace an existing package due to an upload failure, or while we're testing the package construction in the package recipe, I can override the default of the key named replace_package, and the existing package in the repo will be deleted and the new upload will be made. Since the package has changed, the stop processing if predicate will be false, so the recipe will then go on to completion. Second tip, while testing a recipe, we might want to override the behavior of the stop processing if process because we're still playing with the policy or so on. For this to work, we need to make the stop processing if processor overridable. This is done by moving the predicate variable into the input list. With that key now overridable, we can override the key at the command line like this. The string false predicate in capital letters will always return false, meaning that the predicate is never met, so the recipe will continue if this key is used. Thirdly, let's look at a better way of scoping. Jamf Pro cannot compare version strings to tell which are older or newer. But if we only want to scope a version of Firefox to computers that have an older version installed and avoid those that have a newer version, we really need that version comparison logic. This single failing in Jamf Pro is why many people use Monkey with Jamf or spend a lot of time maintaining Jamf patch definitions. Going back to that Edge recipe, you may have noticed another processor in the process list called version regex generator. This single line in a recipe provides that comparison logic we need. The version regex generator processor is based on a script made by Jamf's own William Smith. It calculates a regular expression that matches the version of the app in the package being uploaded, plus any plausible higher version string. Here, the string is generated by the processor for Firefox version 90.0. I won't attempt to break it down, but this string represents version 90.0 and any possible higher version than that. Using this string instead of the actual version allows me to scope my install policy only to computers that have an older version of the app installed, rather than that normal way with Jamf, which is only a match of the exact value. The value is added as a smart group criterion using the application version matches regex or application version does not match regex operators, depending on your smart group composition. In our smart group template, we changed to using the does not match regex search type and set the value to a variable named version_regex, which is outputted from the processor. Using this simple processor in my Jamf recipes makes scoping equivalent to using Monkey or Patch. It means I don't need to maintain patch definitions to figure out which versions are newer or older than the installed version, and I could stick, therefore, with using regular policies. My fourth tip concerns repo organization. JSS Importer is quite strict about where you have to place templates and files associated with a recipe for them to be seen, but Jamf Uploader is more flexible. Jamf Uploader processors will search the entire repo that contains the recipe for a file of the matching name to that specified in the recipe. That means in most circumstances you don't need to provide a path to the file, and they do not need to be in the same folder as the recipe. Nor do you need to copy them to the recipe overrides folder, though you can if you like. In my repos, I put all my templates in a single folder named templates. All my scripts and EAs go into a folder named scripts, and all the icons needed for self-service go into a single folder as well, meaning they don't need to be replicated if used in more than one recipe. You can organize all the additional files how you like, so long as they are somewhere in the same repository or in your recipe overrides folder. Jamf Uploader will find them. So that's my advanced tips. Let's finish with some conclusions. From my side, I've designed Jamf Uploader to replace JSS Importer in my organization, though they can be used side by side. Over the course of this year, I'm replacing all my old JSS recipes with Jamf recipes. It's designed to be simpler to install and use, with more intuitive recipe construction. Everything the processors need to do are based on the Python 3 distribution that is already bundled in with your AutoPackage installer package. By removing the dependency on that separate Python JSS framework, I've got rid of an awful lot of tech debt, at least for now. And the code should be much easier to understand for anyone who wants to contribute to the project.
For me, this was much less to learn than using JSS Importer or Monkey, and I could start small and scale up because it is flexible that way. Jamf Uploader opens up more ways to use AutoPackage for more workflows and lets you eliminate any complexity you don't need for your situation.
I hope you've seen something of interest and that you'd like to give the Jamf Uploader processes a try. If you want to continue the discussion after the event, come to the MacAdmin Slack and join the Jamf Upload channel. Rather than trying to provide links to everything that we've mentioned today in a slide here, I've published a blog post containing all the links. So just visit grahamerpugh.com and find the post about JNUC21. Thanks for joining us.